Good evening everyone, and welcome to a meeting of the Environment, Housing and Regeneration Select Committee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel Hillingdon London. My name is Councillor Bridges and I am Chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible online under the live broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online if the microphone is switched on. We're not expecting any fire drill this evening, so if the alarm does go off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. Mobile phones and devices to be placed on silent or switched off. It's usual best practice in previous meetings virtually to do a roll call. As we are not in a virtual form, I will not be doing that this evening. So on that basis, we'll move on to apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies received from Councillor Deville, with Councillor Davies present as a substitute.
Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to Councillor Davies. Any declaration of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see none. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1, which brings us on to item 4 to agree the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 1 to 6. Are there any comments or questions? Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, I think, just for the record, that we did receive an update from David Haygarth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With there being no other comments or questions, I'll take those as agreed. Thank you. Item 5 is the 2022-23 Budget Planning Report for services within the remit of the Environment, Housing and Regeneration Select Committee. A good evening to Andy, and whenever you're ready to do so, please give your presentation this evening.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first appearance of 2 by Finance at the Select Committee on the annual budget setting cycle, with this first appearance being a presentation of the budget gap presented at February this year, with our second appearance being when we return in January early next year to present the detailed proposals included as part of the consultation budget that will be presented as part of December Cabinet. Now, I won't be running through the whole report this evening, but will provide some headlines in terms of the Council's General Fund, the Housing Revenue Account and the School's budget, and provide an update on the COVID-19 financial pressures that the Council has been dealing with. In the medium term, the Council's General Fund consists of a structural budget gap driven by funding from government not growing in line with rising demand and levels of inflation. The gap over the next 4 years is forecast to be 42 million, reducing down to 20 million after factoring in the council tax increases built into the budget strategy and the impact of the current saving programme. This is consistent with previous years, but with the added complication of the pandemic. The estimated cost to the end of the year for COVID-19 related pressures totals 47.5 million, with 33 million of this falling within the previous 2 financial years and 14.5 million of this falling in 21-22. So as you can see, the pressures from the pandemic have already significantly reduced this year. Pressures have landed mostly within the social care service area and impacts on fees and charges income, particularly within parking services. Social care is expecting to have a long-term pressure due to the pandemic, which has been recognised as a national issue, which is a challenge faced by most councils. The government funding is yet to be firmed up, with the spending review taking place later this year. To date, the pandemic costs have been met by government funding, and we still hold £10 million worth of our own reserves, should government funding not be able to cover the cost of the pressures. Within the Housing Revenue Account, there's going to be a major budget change presented later in the year due to the regeneration schemes bringing significant investment in this area, with the HRA account remaining healthy with sufficient capacity to manage this investment. The school's budgets still face significant challenges, where we're seeing demand for SEND outstripping government funding going back to 2014 when the eligibility criteria was changed. The Council are working on a recovery plan with the Department for Education to bring that position back into balance in the medium to long term. So the next steps will be the formal presentation of the budget to Cabinet in December to approve the budget proposals. At this point, we'll be coming back in January to discuss these proposals with yourselves and answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that very brief presentation. I open up to members' questions. Are there any? Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I just got a couple of questions on page 8. Well, sort of page 7 and 8, so it's item number 4. I just wanted to get some clarity on what we mean by favourable outlook on demand-led budgets in terms of that underspend. So it says it's borrowing costs. But I'm just trying to make it so I understand fully what that means, please. And also the other question I have, is items 7, 8. I mean, there's a lot of speculation talk about speculation. Is it sort of becoming manifest is inflation. This, I mean, I don't know in terms of how you are sort of incorporating those. What is sort of happening into what's happening now, or into this report, and therefore into the coming budget. Thank you.
So in terms of your first question, Councillor, the demand-led budgets relates to the part of the budget monitoring report that talks about development and risk contingency. So we've been reporting that separately due to the volatility in that area. So any services where demand is driven by external factors such as social care within adults, children, disabilities, looked after children, send transport, homelessness and waste, they're all tracked separately within the budget monitoring report. So at the moment, across those streams where we're impacted by demand, we're seeing at the moment a favourable position against the budget that was agreed at February Council.
Councillor Farley, do you wish to have a follow-up?
Thank you. So just to answer, what is it that's driving that favourable upside? Thank you.
Most of the favourable movements within homelessness, and that's related to additional government funding that's been announced for 21-22.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the excellent...
Sorry, there was a second question from Councillor Farley.
Also, yes.
Yes, sorry.
Yes, on your question on inflation, we constantly monitor inflation pressures, both with it that the Council are facing directly and across national data sets. So we review ONS data sets in terms of national indices movements, so including CPI, fuel costs, gas, electricity, etc. And then we also monitor internally how the cost pressures are changing for the Council. So we track things like negotiations within social care. We also are involved in we're aware of the ongoing negotiations on salaries. So that's the largest driver for our inflation requirement built into the budget. Thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 questions which might actually not relate specifically to yourself, so you might not be able to answer them. In terms of, on page 10, corporate overview, item 15 is the housing revenue account. You make reference to the plan to buy 419 new dwellings to offset the 230 expected sales through the right to buy scheme. Do we, well, based on the past, and do we assume that there will be 100% uptake of the right to buy scheme, or is it assumed to be 90%? That, that sort of thing. Is it the case that 230 come up to be eligible, and therefore we assume that they all will go? My other question, which is actually on the same page, the next item, the dedicated school grants in deficit. I appreciate there's a working to develop a recovery plan. I just wondered, compared to other boroughs, particularly London boroughs, I suppose, where it's comparable, where do we compare with the equivalent London boroughs? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the first question then on the housing revenue account, The new dwellings, the 400 new dwellings, that includes acquisitions as well as construction. So that is based on historical trend and a review of the capital programme within the HRA. So that's based on the position presented at February Cabinet and full Council. So it's in line with the budget that we set in that meeting. I'm afraid, in terms of your question on the DSG, I'm not actually aware of how our position compares to the rest of London. However, I'm happy to take that question back to our schools accountant and get an answer for you.
Thank you, Neil. If we could just minute that action point. Councillor Chairman, do you wish to follow up?
I was just going to say thank you. That would be appreciated. I've got no follow-up, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? I cannot see any looking around the room. Councillor Farley, you wish to have anything as opposition lead? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Councillor Chapman, do we know in terms of sort of the sort of lead time, or what the sort of sequence of purchases / building is for new properties over the coming period? Is that something you'll be aware of? Thank you.
Again, so I'd have to take that away. Although the budget papers that went to Cabinet in February, I believe they set out the programme on an annual basis, but more detailed in terms of like a monthly calendar review. I don't have that information, I'm afraid, but again, happy to take that away.
Again, we can minute that and look at that outside the meeting. Okay, would there be no other questions from members? Thank you very much for your attendance, Annie, and if you wish to go, you may do so.
Thank you, Chair.
We move on now to the next item, item 6, which is the new planning policies, proposed planning reforms in England, pages 13 to 16. And good evening to you, Julia. Please give your presentation when you wish to do so.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. Yes, this is a report to note which has sought to summarise the proposals in the planning white paper and then some of the activity that's taken place since that consultation closed last October. So just by way of introduction, when the government launched the white paper last year, they had a number of criticisms of the existing planning system, which they were seeking to solve to the white paper. So that was it's too complex, that planning decisions are discretionary rather than rules-based, that it takes too long for new planning policies to come forward, that the system is too complex, that there has been a loss of public trust, that there isn't enough focus on design, we don't use technology and digitisation in planning, and it's not leading, crucially, to enough homes being built. So in order to address that, as set out in the paper, they outlined 24 new proposals centred around 3 pillars, which are planning for development, which is to try and make the planning system more predictable, and that is done, they propose, to the introduction of a zoning system, so that rather than at the moment we have a series of designations in our local plan, which tends to be land we protect for specific purposes, and then we have allocations, which are areas for growth. They want us to sort of split the borough up into 3 zones, one for growth, one for protection, and what was the last one? And one for renewal, sorry, I was going to say regeneration. They're also looking that within the growth area, that planning permission would become automatic, so that developers, the principle of sites coming forward in that area would not be subject to a discretionary planning decision. It would only be the details around that. So that's one of the big changes, that in certain zones of the borough that you would not get a discretionary planning system with individual applications coming forward to be determined by officers. There would be a sort of automatic grant of permission. They're also looking to put forward the target of 300,000 new homes per annum, and that at the moment is proposed that central government would determine nationally what an individual local authority's target would be. At the moment that's done in London through the London Plan, which goes through examination. We have some influence on that process, so it's not clear how that would be affect what sort of number we would get relative to what our current number is. They're proposing greater use of digital technology. So this is the idea that plans would make much more use of online mapping systems and be much more kind of interactive in the way that we prepare them. That obviously has skills and technology implications for local authorities and whether we're sort of geared geared up to do that. We've got much more emphasis on design, so they have already done this, brought in a new national design guidance, and they've done that actually this week. That's been launched, and there'll be a much greater emphasis on the sort of building beautiful and high quality design agenda. And then finally, the other big proposal is, at the moment we have two parallel systems for mitigating the impact of development on local infrastructure. So on a site-specific basis, we use 106 contributions. So that's if you need to build a new access into the site or things like that. That's funded through 106. And then for certain categories of development, we also have a community infrastructure levy, our own and the mayor's, that we collect, which is used to fund more strategic infrastructure. And they're looking to stop those two separate systems and bring them together into a single sort of levy system. So the consultation on that ran last autumn, from August through to October. We, along with 40,000 other organisations and individuals, responded to that consultation, and a cabinet report went up in October 2020. And it was largely raising concerns on behalf of the council about it negatively impacting on how residents and businesses would be able to interact with the planning system. The government haven't published a response to the responses to the white paper as yet. They've had to bring in an external organisation to process the responses, and the most recent announcements have been that we will get the kind of next stage in autumn 2021, and that's quite likely to be linked to the new planning bill coming forward through Parliament, which was announced in the Queen's speech. And I've just summarised in the report the sort of reactions that there have been. There's obviously been positive and negative reactions, but there have been general concerns about the level of detail that we've had at this stage and the complexity of it being bring forward. The three zones approach, and whether that's an oversimplification of the planning system, and whether residents and businesses will be able to engage in the planning system in the way that they have at present. The impact on the speeding up of local plans that's emphasised, and whether the resources will allow that, and also allow for the increased community involvement that the government wants at that stage. So the idea is that you will front load consultation in the system, and most of the say on how an area will develop will be at the plan making stage, and therefore there is less need for the community to be involved at the individual application stage. But with a sort of 32-month timeline to produce those plans, it's how much engagement we can pull into that process. Other concerns around, there's no mention of how strategic planning will work, so that's how boroughs will work together, more strategic issues such as major infrastructure projects, and what the status of the London plan and the mayor will be in that system has not been clear. There's very serious concerns raised about the potential housing need figures that would come forward. And just to give you an example, at a London level, it would be 155% uplift in London's current housing targets. I think for us at the moment we're at 1,083. We're over 2,500 based on the methodology that's been presented to date, and that would be per annum that the council would have to deliver. And also whether the resourcing and skills are present in local authorities, particularly around design and the digital requirements that are being brought forward. The government have begun to respond, and the most recent has been the Secretary of State for Housing and Local Government gave a speech to the Local Government Association at the beginning of this month, and they have indicated a shift away of being so radical, and I'm quoting the thing, it's not ripping up the planning system and starting again, but to one of improvement. That it does feel that the zonal approach will still come forward, but they are now emphasising they would like it to be more council-led. But they are also continuing with the new infrastructure levy, and they want the accessibility to be through plan making rather than on planning applications. So at this stage, in terms of next steps, we are waiting for the the planning bill to come forward, hopefully in the autumn, along with the government's response to the white paper. So I could take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'll invite questions from members. Start with Councillor Gardner, please.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. A couple of things. On the, I think it's page 15, third bullet point down, about the changes to sections 106 and the SIL. have negative impacts on the delivery of affordable housing. We know that anyway, but a statement basically, it'd be great if the 106 money was actually used in the areas of the development rather than 2 or 3 wards away. Also, regarding the London plan, how much influence do you think we as a borough will have over the amount of house building? Because you say that you're not quite sure at the moment. I just said, can you think of a rough percentage that we, that in terms of the influence we might have? Because I'm slightly worried that we could be set a target that we just can't do, basically.
Yes, Julia.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, in terms of the London plan, we were able to influence the last London plan, and we did actually bring our target down by about 500 units through the examination process, and that was linked to some methodology that the GLA had used around small sites capacity that we were able to prove wasn't robust. And that was done, lots of London boroughs got together. We in particular worked with our West London colleagues on that, providing evidence to that effect. The issue will be is if they are top-down targets, so we were able to influence the inspectors on the London plan, and that was subsequently changed. But if London is given a proportion of the national target to deliver, what we might be able to influence is what proportion of London's target we get. But I think in any circumstance it will probably be an uplift, just because the London-wide target will be uplifted.
Councillor Gardner, do you wish to add anything further? Okay. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I echo what Councillor Gardner said about the Section 106 and the SIL. My own the same about the SIL is particular criticism that's been made by other members is knowing where you get SIL money and where it then goes. So I wouldn't be averse to having something that replaced it, provided that the transparency, you know where it's come from, you know where it's gone, and that's a criticism, and I know it's sort of further agenda point, Chair, but I mean it sort of comes into the item 10 that we've got later on to discuss. I've had a look at the Secretary of State's speech as well. I did find it somewhat contradictory in the sense that a lot of this is, we've got these zoning areas, and it's sort of like, well, that's automatic, that's going to go in there. Yet he then says it's in the hands of local people, and it's going to be. So I get what you said, that there's been some slight sort of nuanced change in what's been said, but I did find that a little bit contradictory. And also, there's another point which I think is under the emergency response. So it's the second to last bullet point about the digital plan making. I know you've touched on that as well. I was wondering if that could be elaborated on a bit more, because the way it was presented in the speech was it's a swipe on a mobile phone, so it should be a very simple thing. You sort of touched about how there might be sort of technical issues and skills issues in relation to the local authority as to how that's dealt with, and I did wonder whether or not it was the intention was to feed into some sort of national system, or whether or not it would be something which would be more local to local authorities or to London. So I was wondering if you knew more, and that could be elaborated on, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the digital, there isn't much detail. There is a sense, I think, that there would be some kind of national platform that our plan would be uploaded as part of a national framework based on sort of GIS data, and that the plan itself, the written policies, would also be something that you would, rather at the moment we tend to do a sort of upload of a file PDF document, that somehow would be more interactive and you would be able to click through. But no, as a profession, we're not quite clear what the expectation will be in terms of digitisation. So that is one area that's been picked up as seeking clarification as a profession, in terms of what we need to upskill ourselves to do, and we're hoping we get more clarity on that in the autumn.
Councillor Farley, do you wish to add anything further?
I think at this stage, it's a noting item, but I think that there are comments that, as a select committee, that can be made upon that. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of authorities have got concerns and from different across the political spectrum about this and how it potentially could impact. But yes, I certainly agree that greater clarity is required with this to understand fully what impacts that will have for our residents and our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether I heard you right, but did you say that the planning sort of process would be negated for larger developers? In other words, they didn't have to get planning permission. Aren't we in danger of getting sort of designs we don't want, shoddy workmanship, etc., etc.? It frightens me that they can go straight through with a massive development, and at the end of it, we're not happy with it, and that's because we haven't gone through the planning process.
Yes, so the idea would be in growth areas, we would produce a set of guidance. They're called local design guides, but they would essentially be a rule book that if a development was going to come forward on a particular site or in a particular area, we would set much more detailed guidelines around parameters, materials, the sort of characteristics of a development, and it would be like a set of rule books, and then we would only be able to assess whether the development met those rules rather than the principle of whether the development is acceptable in the first place, essentially. Where in the renewal areas or the protected areas, as we understand it, there will still be a more discretionary system where individual applications will have to come forward and we will have to determine whether they are in accordance with our policies, and it will be for the council to determine where its growth areas are and the extent to which we use those. But yeah, if we had major areas, it would just be a sense of checking whether they met certain rules that we would also produce alongside our plans.
Thank you, Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your report, Julia. Regarding the planning zones, what impact is that likely to have on our current green belts land?
As we understand it, the government would still want us to protect green belt, so we would envisage that most of our green belt would be in the protected category, and we would still continue to give it the status that it has at present in terms of it would be protected from development except in exceptional circumstances, but we would have to wait for the detailed national guidance. But yes, they're also talking about introducing things like a wild belt designation for areas for increased enhanced biodiversity and things like that. But yeah, we think the principle of green belt will be retained, and it will be a local decision that we can make in terms of whether that's in our protected areas, and that will still be protected.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Just on going back on these zones again, because obviously it's a concern for many. So we've got growth, renewal and protected. Are there definitions for each of those, what each of those means, and then how that, under how it's currently understood, what that would necessarily mean to Hillingdon? Thank you. No, we don't have guidance. We have guidance of how we would be expected to treat planning applications within those zones at a sort of very high level, but no, that was picked up by the parliamentary committee as well, that there is no guidance as to how we would on what basis we would decide a particular part of the borough was in which zone. So no, that is something that we're waiting further information on, and how much local discretion we will have.
That's right. Yep. Okay, thank you everyone for your contributions on that. We move now on to the next item, which is the draft revised statement of community involvement consultation. And again, that's you, Julia, so whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this statement of community involvement is a statutory document that the council must produce and keep up to date a minimum of every 5 years. At present, we have an adopted statement of community involvement that was actually adopted back in 2006. So this is the first time it's been brought up to date in sort of 15 years, and we've gone back and looked at it because we are about to start the process of a local plan review, And in order to do that, one of the requirements is that we must be in accordance with the guidance in our Statement of Community Involvement, and we needed to bring that in line with current government guidance and legislation that's been updated since 2006. So we are out for consultation on this. There is no statutory requirement anymore. That used to have to be consulted on, to consult on that, but we felt, given the role of the document is about how residents are consulted both on the plan making and on planning applications, that the community should have a chance to comment on the document, and obviously yourselves as well. So the purpose of the document is to establish what formal arrangements and standards we will use for the community to understand how they can be involved in the preparation and alteration of the development plan, but also how they will be consulted on planning applications and any other aspects of the planning process that the community get involved in. An example of this would be when we introduce what are called Article 4 directions, which is when we seek to remove certain permitted development rights, which is where a type of development can occur without planning permission. There's a need to do a public consultation on that. So just look at, or when, for example, we did a conservation area appraisal and we would consult on that. So we're seeking to just set out our standards that we will follow. The document is sort of set out in 7 sections. The two main, or the sort of core sections, are the plan making section, which is where we set out what consultation methods we will use to engage the community and other stakeholders on the plan making process. We have statutory stages that we have to go through, and we sort of seek to set out what type of processes we will use at each of those stages. Then there's neighbourhood planning. So as an authority, we have an obligation to provide a certain amount of support should a neighbourhood plan come forward. We only have one neighbourhood forum in the borough at the moment, which is in Ickenham. We haven't had an actual neighbourhood plan come forward as part of that forum, but if we were, then the document sets out, again, the support that we would provide and the consultation requirements, because they are slightly different to the development plan that the council has to produce. The next type of document is the community infrastructure levy. So this is the charge that we have on particular types of development, mainly housing, office and hotels in our borough. It's sort of subject to viability, which is why we don't have it on all types of development. And what you do is you produce a charging schedule. Again, that is subject to external examination, and as part of that process we consult residents and developers and businesses on those charges. And then it just picks up those other bits of guidance that I just mentioned in terms of conservation area appraisals and Article 4 directions. On the development management side, it sets out what our approach to consultation on planning applications is. We actually, in the document, only focus on the sort of statutory requirements that we have and try to set those out clearly to help residents and the community understand what our sort of consultation requirements are and how they can get involved in both the planning application process and the planning enforcement process. And the final section is about how we will review the SDI and make sure it remains fit for purpose and commit to updating it every 5 years, which was a requirement that was brought in 2017. So as it's out for consultation, the report seeks comments from the committee and any questions they have on that document.
Thank you very much, Julia. I invite members for comments and questions. We'll start with Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. One thing I'm curious, so if we've gone from agenda item 6 with discussions about changes to planning, I'm wondering how that integrates into this document, with not sort of like there's a hold in place, or I'm just sort of curious as to that transition, particularly when it says that we're expecting something autumn this year to come through on that change. So I'm just curious as to how that integrates into this thing. Thank you.
Councillor, the answer is we don't know yet. So this will very much guide the work that we're doing under the current system, and I expect there will be a requirement for some kind of statement of how we will involve the community in the new plan making system, particularly given the emphasis on front loading that and getting much more engagement. But yeah, again, it's something that we haven't had any further detail on.
Do you wish to add anything, Councillor Farley?
Thank you. I'm just from my point of view, so it's trying to avoid as much duplication and extra work as possible. So it was just, it's just trying to understand that, because it's just again, my understanding with this document is because it's obviously by law it has to be done now, because it's now time is up effectively, it has to be done. So it's not as though we could stretch it out a bit further to try and sort of encompass that. But that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, I'm intrigued about the consultation by neighbourhood forums. Will that be ward by ward, estate by estate? And also it says that preparation, while there's no requirement in the regulations for the forum to involve local people in the preparation plan, it's strongly advisable. How can you police that? Because otherwise it will end up with little cliques of people deciding what can be done for the area.
Yes, in terms of, so in order to produce a neighbourhood plan, there has to be a neighbourhood forum, and there are regulations on who has to be, sort of a neighbourhood forum has to have a certain representation. It has to have a minimum number of people from the community. There has to be a local councillor on the forum. There has to be a certain amount of business and resident representation. So I think it's 21 people is the minimum, and then that has to come to the council, and we have to say that we consider that to be representative. So a neighbourhood forum has to be kind of ratified by the council as being an organisation that that can go ahead and represent that neighbourhood. We have, for example, in other London boroughs, you can get rival neighbourhood forums for the same area coming forward, and the council can kind of has either said they've either got to work together or has refused to. So the council can take a role in that, and then if a neighbourhood forum is formed and then they do a plan, again, they get the plan to a certain point, and then it gets handed over to us as the council to take it through the examination process, and we have to do a statement of compliance and say there's a set of regulations and things, and it has to be in compliance with our plan as well. So it can't do anything that sort of doesn't sit with the council's own plans. So again, we get kind of influence on that as well. So there are kind of checks and balances in terms of how representative that document is, in terms of the community as a whole. But they have to come to us. We don't go out and sort of ask for neighbourhood forums to be created. They have to be a kind of ground up initiative, and then they come to us. And at the moment, we've as I said, we've only had one come forward, which is in Ickenham.
Councillor Gardner?
When you say ratified by the council, are you talking about yourselves in the planning department? Who is the council?
It's the local planning authority, so I think it goes up to full council at the moment. That's it.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? I can't see any. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Sort of going back to the SIL again, is there any way within this to incorporate or increase transparency in terms of when we get money in, where it goes? Because it's a bugbear with some members that we just don't know what's happening. Whereas what's Section 106, you can tie it together. Thank you.
It doesn't sit particularly within this, but the government have sort of done that job for you in a sense, in that since December last year, we now have an obligation on ourselves to produce an infrastructure funding statement, which should set out all SIL income and all Section 106 income and SIL expenditure in the year in full. And we also have a quarterly requirement to produce a data file on our website that is then available to be uploaded by central government. It's an obligation, but there is a transition period for us to get to that point. We don't have the systems at the moment to do that, but we are in the process of, we've procured it now, of implementing it with ICT. And so over the course of the next 12 months, we will have a new database that monitors our Section 106 and SIL, which sits in my area, and we will be populating that, and that data we should then be able to produce much more granular data from that, which we can then provide. So it's something that's been identified as an issue that we need to address, and we are in the process of addressing it. But yeah, we are trying to increase the amount of information available to do with Section 106 and SIL.
Okay. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. Julia, is there any plan to introduce a bond or a refundable bond for damage that's incurred by builders when they're making a new development? I'm thinking particularly of pavements. We only have to look around the borough to see how many pavements have been destroyed by lorries not using the proper sort of weight plates or whatever they're called to protect the pavements, because of course once they're gone, it's left for the public to fund.
I'm not aware of anything. I'm going to ask Ros. No, I'm not. I can take that back and just check whether there's any further legislation that we're not using around that with colleagues. So yeah, we'll come back to you on that one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gardner to finish.
On page 51, 672, says the council will consult neighbouring residents within a certain radius of the application site and community groups. What is the rough radius? I'm only asking that because several developments have sprung up and people have said that they haven't been consulted and they virtually live over the road. So, have you got a... No?
I'm just going to pass to Ros, who's our Planning Services Manager, so she looks after development management.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So the current system, the legislative requirement is to either do a site notice or to notify adjoining neighbours. So there isn't a sort of radius as such. Beyond that, it would be to the council's discretion, and that would sort of come down to the officer's, common sense approach, essentially.
Councillor Gardner, just to add anything else? Okay. In which case, thank you very much, Julia, and also for your attendance this evening.
Were there any comments that the committee wished the officers to include in the report?
I believe the comments made by Councillor Farley and Councillor Gardner were sufficient. I believe they could be included in the minutes if the committee is happy to do so. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Item 8 is our scoping reports for review. As members will be aware, at the last meeting we were asked to discuss a potential review topic, and we discussed around how to improve feedback from residents of social housing. And following that meeting, Neil has liaised with officers outside of the meeting, and he has brought before us this scoping report. So thank you to Neil and indeed the officers for their hard work behind the scenes on this. So basically, it's envisaged that there will be 2 witness sessions, and a suggested schedule is set out in the scoping report and indeed on the work programme. Are there any comments or points of clarity that members wish to have on this scope report? Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. On the witness sessions, for what page it was on, it refers to potentially visits. I'd like to know how they'd be arranged if we were to do that. How that selection criteria would be to where we would go, but also, given sort of time constraints, how effective that would be to arrange and actually get what we need from a visit.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So ultimately, it's at the discretion of the committee. If the committee feel that those such visits would be useful and they can pinpoint where they feel those would be best suited, then I can go away and look to arrange those. It's something in there as a potential based on what the committee feel, really, rather than a mandated exercise as part of the review. So I leave it entirely in the hands of the committee as to whether you feel, as the review progresses, whether it becomes apparent that you feel that there's something that you think would be of benefit to the review.
Thank you, Neil. From my own point, I think we can visit things like the housing estates in the open outdoors, I suppose, with COVID restrictions in place. I think that'd be a good starting point. Maybe talk to residents and maybe any tenancy managers are in place if we feel there's a need to, depending on what we discussed this evening. But certainly things like that, I would welcome the opportunity to go on visits, to be honest, because I don't think committees do enough of them. They used to, but in recent years there don't seem to be many of them, and I think we should change that if we can. Councillor Brightman?
Thank you. I was just going to suggest, actually, that on page 70, where it says to identify a pilot estate, that would be a good opportunity to do a site visit.
Yes, I agree, Councillor Brightman. Councillor Kaufman?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm looking at page 71, the last but one paragraph, where it says, the policy paper, the Charter of Social Housing Residents, Social Housing White Paper, published in 2012, 17th of November, sets out the actions that the government will take to ensure that residents in social housing are safe, listened to, and live in good quality homes, and have access to redress when things go wrong. I would like to know what our housing stock is, and also what the conditions of some of these houses are. I'm sure if we look deeply at, in depth at this issue, we would find that some of the houses are really, really not fit for purpose. I could go into detail about something I've actually experienced over the last few weeks, but I won't. And also, what do we do about voids? Do we just leave them to rot, or do we get in there, get them up to a good standard, ready for rental to the marketplace? So, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Kaufman. I appreciate the points you've raised. I believe in terms of void properties, we're looking at empty properties as part of the work programme on an information item, but for this scoping report specifically, it's about tenants' feedback and engagements with them. So I think in terms of housing conditions, that could well fall under that by getting feedback from residents. But the other thing will be looked at later in the work programme. So I see hands up. Councillor Gardner?
My concern with a lot of residents is that years ago, when you moved into a new property, and this a social housing property, be it RSL or council, it was done to a good standard. You could literally move in and put your white goods in. These days, the criteria is quite low, let's put it like that. So people's expectations when they move in, I'd say I've had to provide carpets out of my DV fund for somebody because I didn't realise because I don't live in social housing. I live in a co-op, which is completely different. But I assumed that carpets were put down, everything, the plugs were put back in the wall properly, because you get some people that do their own DIY electric stuff and take things off. But the standard worries me at the moment. I've been told, well, that's all we have to do now, Councillor, in terms of the painting, changing the kitchens and the bathrooms. It's a lot of it is bodged at the moment. I don't like saying things like that because we've got our in-house contractors, but it just worries me slightly about what people's expectations. They think, oh, good, finally got a social housing. They could have been in B&B or temporary for a long time, and then they find that they've got to spend a hell of a lot of money to get it up to a decent standard, not luxury, but literally a decent standard. So I wonder if there's somewhere we can, I don't know. I assume the legislation has changed, so the criteria for what it's got to be like now is different from what it was years ago.
Neil, is that something we could look at, particularly with new tenants and their feedback when they first move in?
Yeah, I think that'd be certainly borne out by the witness sessions and the feedback that we receive from tenants. But I'm sure also that the office will be able to elaborate on exactly what checks are done prior to tenants moving in and what standards require the council to provide as a social housing landlord.
Also, in terms of appliances, where the council don't provide that, are we signposting these residents to the right charities and organisations who can help them as well? Because there are organisations around who do offer things like a fridge freezer or something like that. If they're not aware of that, then there's a problem. So we need to try and ensure that they are aware of all of their available options. Councillor Gardner.
It's something else that, if we're going to go and visit an estate or go and see people, I think you have to really set the scene for them so they don't regard us as the enemy. Because if you go into a lot of estate space, like, I mean, I have people take their children out, come in, Councillor Gardner's come in, quick, hide away, you know, this sort of thing. But people see councillors as maybe having ulterior motives. So to knock on somebody's door or speak to them and say, well, actually, we're here to find out what your problems are, what your expectations were, etc. Like that. Somebody's got to set the scene for these residents before they'll be thinking, what's going on here? And a lot of people won't tell you the truth for fear, because we're the council, we could somehow, I don't know, not evict them, but sort of jeopardise where they are. Does that make sense? I'm just
Yeah,
thinking
it's a good
about,
point.
yeah.
I'm just trying to think of ways around it. I mean, yeah.
I think that's something that I'll have to discuss with the relevant people, the relevant officers, before we look to bring those people in for this part of the review.
We're certainly looking at previous repairs we've done. I know that the council do a sort of feedback form. If we can go through previous ones in recent times and just see which ones were very dissatisfied, maybe we could reach out to them and just ask them to come forward a bit more to this forum and see, explain what they thought was wrong and what could be done better going forward. Just a suggestion. Councillor Farley?
Thank you. I'm glad that obviously leaseholders are included with this, because the communal areas are a particular issue as well. I think when I do my walkabouts and speaking with residents, there's those leaseholders that are rather concerned that the council sort of has a perceived way of just doing what they like, and then they're lumped with costs and things like that. So I'm glad that we can include them in this review. We also go back to the witness sessions. It talks about so I'm going to use the Red Brick Estate in Haystown, Austin Road. Sorry, yes, yeah, and Avondale, and bringing people in from there. Based on the fact that there's been the consultation already. I mean, these are, I would have no objection per se, it's just these are significant developments and significant activities that are going on. I'm not sure what the objective is for getting information from them, unless it's just sort of historical, what it was like, or what it is like. This is obviously going to get the attention to replace it and have a new development there, and with Avondale. I mean, that probably would be the objective, I suppose. It's just I'm trying to sort of get a handle on, because it's just such a significant development that's going on. And I'm just sort of thinking about other smaller estates or smaller blocks or other sort of tower blocks we've got in the borough.
I think, and I don't want to speak for the officers in question, but my understanding is that those particular people were raised as potential witnesses simply because the communication lines are already there as part of those developments. As ever, if members have any other people that they want to point out to us, absolutely very happy to go and reach out to them, because one of the main issues with these reviews is getting members of the public to engage with the council, which is obviously perfect for the topic of this, because it's all about engagement, but we are still limited in people being willing to come along and speak. So if members do have any ideas, gratefully received.
Thank you. Councillor Byman.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on from what Councillor Gardner was saying about the standards that we should be giving in social housing to tenants, we also need to balance that with what we expect, how we expect them to leave it. Sort of in the military, when you're allocated property, you also have to hand it over in the condition you found it. So it's sort of responsibilities as well as rights.
Thank you. If I can just touch on the Better Neighbourhood Fund as well. I believe I mentioned this with you outside of the meeting. I know that Chrysalis doesn't touch playgrounds on housing estates, and you've confirmed to me that the BNF doesn't cover playgrounds. So I'm just wondering what's happening with that, because we've got no man's land here where no funding is available for these playgrounds or other places. It was my understanding that the BNF did, and I'm sure that we had one in our ward done in recent years. But it'd be worth just questioning officers on that and finding out if there's no pot of money for those sort of things, where's it going to come from going forward in terms of regenerating those playgrounds, which of course makes a huge difference on council estates, especially for young families. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a couple of things. The long-term residents at the Red Brick Estate may be worth speaking to, because the work that's happened, I know there's some people that live there over 30 years, so it may be worth looking at what's happened and what hasn't gone well. So that may be an option to go forward. And also on Councillor Brightman's point about how social housing residents leave their houses when they leave them, is there an option there where if they leave white goods, we can keep them as a council and maybe give them to people that are struggling to buy? I know they have to take carpets out when they leave social housing houses. If they'd have left the carpets in, it might have been cheaper to get the carpet cleaned rather than have to get a new carpet put down and something like that.
Good point. Councillor Kaufman.
Yeah, I think the other the question comes in here, and that's the housing maintenance. I think we need a real big shake-up in this. I've got someone that phoned me today who's got a 12-stone young man who has got so many disabilities, and he has a through the ceiling lift, and they've been waiting 11 weeks to have that lift restored, and the poor guy is having to lift this young man up the stairs several times a day. That can't be right, you know. I'm going in to inquire about it, but that's not acceptable. And I think that goes through all the maintenance of our properties, whether it be decorating, electrics, boilers. We've got to get these guys, tradesmen, that know about all these things and that do a job that they know about. And instead of bringing someone in, you know, that hasn't got that sort of experience. But that's not for me to say, unfortunately. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Sorry, Neil, go on.
Just on that, Councillor Calvin, I think it's important to recognise that the focus of the review is about engaging with tenants and leaseholders, and so those sorts of things would be covered by ensuring that residents and leaseholders know how to get in touch with the appropriate people to resolve issues, rather than the granular level of the issue themselves, if that makes sense.
The father is
Can you use your mic, Councillor Kaufman?
So your microphone, Councillor.
the father is no dumber, and I was down a pretty good job, and all the people that have been promising him this have just let him down. They just don't respond. In 11 weeks, whatever part it is, you get it. This is not. This is urgent. Yeah.
So potentially there's an issue with communication there, and then acting on that communication that we can look at as part of this ongoing engagement plan that's outlined in the scoping report.
Thanks, Neil.
And if indeed we find that there's a huge issue with repairs or something like that, could form another review at a later time. But in terms of this one, it's about engagement with tenants and various issues that they may have. Who did I have? I had Councillor Brightman, then I'll come back. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there going to be an opportunity in here to discuss with housing, social housing landlords, their expectations for tenants and how they're engaging with the tenants?
We'll have witnesses in terms of officers, but Neil?
Yes, potentially. I'll need to look at that in more detail, I think, before I can 100% say yes or no, because it's linked to, because as I said, this committee is in a unique position to really help steer the department and how they actually put engagement, that engagement plan into place for, you know, the future. So it's such an early stage that the committee can really have a direct impact on those things. So it's definitely an opportunity for the committee. I would expect that to include things about how the council is engaging with landlords and leaseholders, but whether that includes how they themselves deal with their tenants is potentially something I can look at.
So I was just sort of wondering in terms of rules that the council can impose on those that have, that sublet to residents in Hillingdon, so that they have to maintain the same level of standards as if they had a council-provided property.
I'll certainly look into it.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 69, except from tenancy services, so we've got these targets for various objectives. Are we able to sort of have sight of some of these things before they are produced, so we can sort of, make comment on or discuss as to how they look, how they are presented to residents, tenants and leaseholders? And then also sort of moving with that, I think Councillor Kaufman mentioned with regards to safety and having a good place to live, what the sort of measurable, how we measure this in a substantive way that actually is meaningful. But I would like to see some of these documents before if that was an opportunity to look at them, discuss them, make any comments on them. I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Davis. Okay. Councillor Gardner.
I'd like to. I don't know. It sounds really stupid, but I think as a committee we should set out the standards that we expect. Okay, as opposed to the standards that may some of the houses. I mean, I'll go on about my housing co-op again, but when people move in, they have a list of things that they're responsible for, and there's got if you break that, it's down to you. You've got to repair it, but it's got to go back to exactly the way that it was. We show them what the gas safety contract is, so they know that. I mean, I imagine a lot of people who live in houses around here wouldn't know what a gas safety contract looked like. Their landlord could show them anything, basically, couldn't they? What we do is virtually spoon feed our tenants so that they're quite happy, they know what they can and can't do. And believe it or not, it works really, really well, even down to say, this is the day the rubbish goes out, please don't put it on the street on the Wednesday if it goes out on the Friday. It's spoon feeding them, but everything works quite well. And then again, say, because it's a cooperative, any money we make goes back into the properties, and the residents decide what they want. We say, okay, we've got this much left, what would you like us to do with it? I mean, there's no reason why, as a local authority providing social housing, we couldn't get residents and ask them what they actually want, because it's one thing providing stuff for people, but if they don't want it, what's the point? And that's why I tend to, my committees are literally, this is how much money we've got to spend, what do you think we should do with it? And don't make stupid suggestions, because some people do. Somebody wanted Madonna to do something once, so I don't think so. but it's literally like that. If you treat a tenant as an individual and you value what they say, it might be rubbish, but some of it may not be, but we can use that. But I think if we say, as a committee, these are the standards we expect our properties to be let in, and see actually whether or not the criteria is met by the lettings team, because I put money on it's not.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Neil?
If I could just finish up. So, yeah, I mean, there's a wide variety of things that have been discussed so far. And some of it absolutely would be right in the review. I'm just conscious of the fact that we don't have a huge amount of time for this review, and I would draw members' attention just to the terms of reference, just to ensure that the scope of the review doesn't grow too large. We need to make sure that we are focusing on the things that the review is really best able to affect. But everything that has been discussed, I will go to the officers and we'll we'll have a look at, and that will inform how we then treat the review moving forward.
Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to echo what Neil said. Obviously, we need a relatively narrow scope, but all the very valid items that have been brought up already, I suspect some of them might come out of the report as future items. And in a way, when it becomes a future item, we'll have already done a lot of the groundwork because we've already spoken to people and we have examples. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. So going back to Councillor Brightman was saying, so in terms of getting an identified area or site, how do we arrange that? Because what I wouldn't like to do is sort of go here only. I know obviously the Austin Road accepted, but some other areas across the borough. So we've got a flavour, and I guess they're sort of part with that. You've got witness session. It's scheduled for a month. I'm wondering how do we do that over a matter of like a number of days, evenings, or weekend, or how would that work?
I would suggest that any members who have any ideas of locations feedback to Neil. Neil can liaise with myself and the Labour lead, and we can decide outside this meeting the selected areas to go and see.
Yeah, I would. That's exactly what I was going to say. So members, feel free to come to me. I will then liaise with yourselves to discuss and really firm up those things in conjunction with officers to make sure that we are pointing you at the right people.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 9 is our Cabinet Forward Plan, pages 93 to 98. Are there any comments? No. Councillor Farley?
Yes.
Is this a copy or?
No. So I should just clarify. So that is the newest version of the Cabinet member for Cabinet Forward Plan. It came about after these papers were published. The only change are the items that are highlighted in yellow. So there's the Cranford Park restoration project, which has just changed date, and then 2 new items that have been added: the follow-up to the statement of community involvement that we've heard tonight, and also the approval to establish a dynamic purchasing system. Those are the only new additions.
Happy to know? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item 10, last item for this evening is the work programme, pages 99 to 102. Councillor Chapman, I know you have some suggestions which we discussed outside the meeting. I'll come to you in a moment. Is there any other points before we do? Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. 2 points, please. Going back to SIL again. I wanted to know, so this is for September, do we know what is, or how that report looks, or what that looks like? Again, it's about sort of identifying what goes where it comes from, where it goes. And then
Councillor, SIL's not for September. We've had SIL.
Oh, sorry.
No. So SIL is an annual report. It's currently scheduled for February each year.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
so it actually was.
Apologies.
So
okay.
it was considered by the previous and now retired RESPOC, the Resident Education and Environmental Services Policy Overview Committee, in February, and it won't come to this committee again until February 2022.
Sorry, wrong. I was looking at the wrong line there. The other one was under the one-off servicing monitoring. I was wondering whether there was any capacity on the climate change, because it's such a huge issue, with any capacity to having sort of a catch-up in the new year, just to see how the progress is and how we're getting on. Because we've had that June. Yeah, it's June. Yeah. I was wondering if there's something the capacity within the new year for a sort of an updated briefing.
Yeah, it's not currently scheduled, but absolutely something we can look at, because this committee does lead on climate change. So I think it'd be useful to have a further update, and I'll firm that up with David Hagar.
Thank you. Cannot see anyone else indicating, so we'll go to Councillor Chapman with the suggested information items.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as the Chairman said, we discussed various ideas which members may be interested in. I should say from the outset, some of these may have been looked at by either the previous committee to this one, or indeed other committees. Equally, if they haven't been looked at previously, it might be the case that they're come under somebody else. But anyway, I'll read out the 5 suggested areas. I won't go into the details of my thinking and analysis, but I will sort of explain, well, just simply why I think it's worth doing. First one is recycling. I have to say, I think as a borough we've got a good story to tell. However, we can't be complacent, and if there is any opportunities to improve it, I think we should always be open to that. I'd be interested in benchmarking against other boroughs. In fact, as I said to the Cabinet member for recycling earlier today, even if we have a 99% good story, I'd like to know what the 1% is and what we're going to do about that. The other one is, well, the second one is pest control services, and I have to acknowledge the fact that it was raised at full council, so it struck me then as being a very valid item. Third one is alligating. The alligating scheme's been up and running for in excess of 10 years. It strikes me that it merits a sort of where are we, where do we stand, shall we say, review. I'm aware of issues in terms of its ongoing management and complaints, etc. I think the scheme per se is good, but I'd like to look at the on-management of it, shall we say. Next one is the Hillingdon First card, which is basically in a similar category. It's been up and running, I think, for in excess of 10 years, so I think it merits a review of where are we now, you know, where could we, you know, my particular interest is again, is it reaching out to everybody that it could be reached out to? What areas aren't part of the scheme, etc., that sort of thing. Last but certainly not least is street champions. You don't seem to hear a lot about it, to be honest, nowadays. I'd be interested to know, again, it's about 10 years old or maybe more. I'd like to know where we stand, what's going to happen going forwards, that sort of thing. So they're my 5 suggested areas. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. As you indicated earlier, that some of these issues may have been covered by previous POCs. I know we've just had our review into littering and fly tipping, which might cover some of the recycling, but we can look for ways that we may not have touched on and look at that. Hillingdon First, I think, is a good suggestion, though it may come under corporate, but we can get that checked. And the alligating, I believe corporate also looked at that a few months back, but again we can check that. But very good suggestions. Neil, did you wish to comment?
Yeah, and again with the so Hillingdon First potentially is a corporate services POC, not POC, select committee I should say, item as well. So if the committee are minded to allow me to, or mandate that I go away and look at these offline and where possible add them to the work programme for consideration next time.
Yep. Thank you. And as we said, these aren't review sessions, they're just information items, so the officers would come from those departments and we would quiz them and question them on the briefings that they give to us before that meeting, so should be very informative and interesting. Okay, I believe we're done for this evening, unless anyone else has anything else, in which case thank you very much for your attendance this evening and declare the meeting closed at 8:15. Thank you very much.